Every offseason, NBA players sign new contracts, but not every new contract is a fair deal, which is why we've seen many cases in league history where either the player or the team has gotten scammed out of a lot of money. Sometimes players get paid too much, and every once in a while, they don't get paid enough. But either way, it makes for some of the worst contracts in NBA history. So let's take a look. Now, back in 2012, when Steph Curry signed a new contract, he signed one of the worst I've ever seen because he didn't get enough money. Because back in 2012, he signed a 4-year, $44 million deal. Now, at the time, it was kind of fair. He was already an elite shooter and putting up solid numbers, but in his third season, he just had 2 big ankle injuries that resulted in him missing 56 games. So his future was kinda uncertain. So in the 2012 offseason, he signed that deal, and right after, couldn't have possibly had any more of a meteoric rise. That next season, he puts up a career high and makes the Warriors a playoff team. In 2013, he becomes a first-time All-Star. In 2014, he wins League MVP and an NBA championship while making $11 million a year. And on that same pay, in 2015, he becomes a unanimous league MVP, changes the game of basketball, and leads the Warriors to a 73-9 record while being paid about the league average. From a GM standpoint, it was clearly one of the biggest bargains of all time, but they did take a risk on signing Curry with his ankle injuries, so the $11 million a year was the best deal that he was going to get at the time, and I don't think either himself or the team really knew just how good he was going to get, so I guess it makes sense. Another NBA contract where a player just really undervalued themselves was Chris Webber, who was a first overall pick in 1993. Well, this was before they had time constraints on contracts and before they had rookie salary scale limits, so teams had to sign rookies to actual deals, and Chris Webber accepted, then signed a 15-year $74 million contract with the team before ever playing an NBA game, which averaged out to about $5 million a year, and this is just insane. I mean, I could get where he was coming from. Sign a contract in your first season, and no matter what happens, if you play bad or if you ever get injured, you have a guaranteed $75 million. It sounds good, but it also must have been before he got an agent. But luckily for him, for some reason, the Warriors included a clause in his contract that said he could opt out of it after his first year. Why would you try to lock up your first overall pick with a 15-year deal, but also let them choose to walk away after 1 season? Well, Webber got smart, and that's exactly what he did. The Warriors planned to underpay the rookie backfired, and he left the team to the Washington Bullets instead, and apparently got a better agent, and things worked out for him because he actually ended up making $178 million over his 15-year NBA career. But okay, now we're moving on to contracts where the teams paid the players way too much money when they shouldn't have. And a good example of that is Gilbert Arenas. Now in 2007, Gilbert Arenas only played 8 games for the Wizards due to a knee injury. He tried coming back during the season, but he was clearly still hurt, so he missed more games. Then in 2008, even without him being fully recovered, the Wizards gave him a 6-year, $111 million contract. Now as a side note, it's also worth noting that the Warriors offered him a 6-year, $100 million deal too, which he declined. But just imagine he takes that. Imagine how different the Warriors would have been had Gilbert Arenas been signed on a deal with them until 2014. But okay, on side note. So he accepts the Wizards deal, but only if they re-sign his friend Antoine Jameson, so they also do that with a 4-year, $50 million contract. Well, the whole thing was a disaster because that's $161 million to keep an injured Gilbert Arenas, who only played 2 games in the 2008 season. In 2009, he then got suspended for bringing a weapon to the Wizards locker room. In 2010, he made his way back for the final 20 games, but wasn't the same player anymore. Then they traded him to the Magic, who had to use the amnesty clause on him because he was so bad. So after Washington signed Arenas to that huge contract, all that happened was they played worse than ever, which was also how they were able to land the first overall pick and draft John Wall, who the Wizards would repeat history with and also give him one of the worst max contracts in NBA history with his 4-year, $170 million deal. Well, it kicked in and started in the 2019 season. 32 games into that year, and he was rolled out for the rest of it with a heel injury, then of course ruptured his Achilles at home, and never played another game for the Wizards. So they had to give up a first-round pick just to trade him away. And honestly, even at the time, I don't think I would have considered John Wall a max contract kind of guy, even though he was a former first overall pick. But where he was drafted doesn't mean much because former Grizzlies player Bryant Reeves was a 6th overall pick and got a 6-year, $65 million deal that he definitely didn't deserve. In his second year in the league, he put up 16, 8, and 2 and really wasn't a terrible center, so Memphis gave him that deal, but then it slowly kind of came out what kind of player he really was, because he'd consistently be out of shape, had a terrible diet, and claimed that in the offseason he couldn't work out in the summer because his hometown of 300 people didn't have anyone he could play basketball against or a gym where he could work out. So at one point in his career, he was well over 300 pounds, and not surprisingly, eventually developed chronic back pain, then just flat out retired 3.5 years into his 6-year deal when he was 28 years old. But speaking of Grizzlies player, I may have never seen a worse contract than the one given to Chandler Parsons in 2016. Now back up a little bit. At the end of the 2014 season, Parsons was playing with the Mavs and got injured and missed the rest of that season with a knee injury. Well, he comes back in 2015, and at the end of that season, Parsons tears his meniscus and again misses the playoffs. Then 2016 comes around when he's a free agent, and the Grizzlies for some reason give him a max 4-year, $94 million contract. Well, his knee never recovered, and it became a nagging injury over the next 3 years, where he only played 95 total games. And I think how his situation played out was really what caused the Grizzlies rebuild to start when it did, with them trading Gasol and Conley. So he then gets traded to the Hawks, and after 5 games into it, gets into a car crash that just ends his career. So with all that said, this was definitely a waste of $94 million in the Memphis Grizzlies. Speaking of a waste, Bill Walton is known as one of the best centers in NBA history, but people believe he had a lot of wasted potential due to all of his foot injuries. Now, his career started on the Blazers, but by his 4th year, he didn't like how the team was handling him when he got injured, so he protested and sat out an entire season until they traded him. So they traded him to his hometown team in the San Diego Clippers for 2 players and a first-round pick. He would then sign a 7-year, $7 million contract with the Clippers. Bill Walton would debut for the team at the start of the 1979 NBA season, play 14 games, then get injured again, missed the rest of that season, and the entire next 2 seasons after that. And when he returned 2 years later, he would only play 33 games and 52 games in each of those seasons. So due to the team's major lack of success and ticket sales, they had to relocate to Los Angeles and become the Los Angeles Clippers. After the move, Bill Walton said, "When you fail in your hometown, that's as bad as it gets, and I love my hometown. I wish we had NBA basketball here, and we don't because of me. It's my greatest failure as a professional in my entire life. I couldn't get the job done in my hometown, and I'll carry that with me forever." And that's rough. It's a first too. First time that a terrible long-term contract actually cost a city their entire NBA team. Now switching gears, I'll never forget the New York Knicks giving a washed-up Joakim Noah a 4-year, $72 million contract. Now I get that they had just traded for Derrick Rose and made Tom Thibodeau their head coach. They were trying to recreate the Chicago Bulls and bring them back together, which doesn't make sense. It didn't work when they were all at the top of their games. Why would it work when Rose was injury prone and Joakim had only played 29 games for Chicago the year before? Well, even with that, they gave Noah the massive contract that no one else in the league would have given him. And due to injuries and suspensions, he only played 46 games in year 1 for New York, 40 total minutes in year 2 for them before getting traded. And he would later go on to admit that he partied a lot while playing for the Knicks, and that was a big reason that he never got back onto the court how he should have. So good job, Knicks. And the timing on that was about as bad as the terrible contract given to Sean Kemp. Now Kemp's career is really only remembered for his days on the Supersonics. Everything after that was just kind of bad. So let's give a shout out to Seattle for knowing when to trade Sean Kemp, because they traded him to the Cavs, and Cleveland, thinking they were getting the 5-time All-Star, signed him right away to a 6-year, $107 million deal. Well, year 1 went good. He made the All-Star team again and led the team to the playoffs. But in year 2, he showed up to training camp weighing over 315 pounds, but somehow still managed to average over 20 a game and played alright, but the super athletic prime Sean Kemp that they gave $107 million to was gone. So he then gets traded after only 3 seasons. Then his career quickly fell off on the Blazers and the Magic, and he would never play another NBA game again at only 33 years old when the deal finally expired. So you really can't blame Cleveland too much for giving them the money they did. How would they know that was going to happen? But looking back and the fact that it did, it was still a terrible contract. Former NBA player Jason Williams may not need to be formally included on this list, but he at least deserves a mention because he was starting to break out as a player around 1998 and 1999. So the New Jersey Nets give him a 6-year, $86 million deal, which is about $14 million a year. Well, 3 months into that 6-year contract, he broke his leg and had to have career-ending surgery. So his career was over, and the Nets still had to pay him. But I say he shouldn't be formally included because a league insurance policy did cover them for this one. But then also 2 years later, Williams accidentally took out his limo driver. He was then sent to prison, and while he was there for 2 years, he was still getting paid. Now, I've been over the Timofey Mozgov and Luol Deng horrible contracts a few times on this channel, and so I won't really be getting into them, but they deserve to mention. Former NBA player Josh Smith signed a historically bad contract looking back though, because of course the Detroit Pistons were always on the lookout for new talent. But when their front court was already made up of Greg Monroe and Andre Drummond, who both physically couldn't shoot a basketball, it wasn't a smart idea to sign Josh Smith to a 4-year, $54 million deal to play small forward when he was a 28% three-point shooter. So obviously it didn't work out. And it was so bad that when Stan Van Gundy took over the team in Smith's 2nd year of his deal, he made the Pistons flat out release Josh Smith, and they just paid him the rest of his deal while he wasn't on the team. That's how bad it was. They chose to pay him to stay at home instead of just keeping him on the roster. And it wasn't really Josh's fault here. He thrived on the Hawks for years before this, but when he landed on the Pistons, it was right in the middle of the game changing, which was why after they released him, he only came off the bench for 2 more years before never playing in the NBA again. Then finally, Bismack Biyombo knows all about bad contracts. Now today, Biyombo's 29 years old and was coming off the bench playing about 10 minutes a game for the Suns. He's a bench player. We'll go back to the 2016 postseason where he was on the Raptors, and they had a deep run into the Eastern Conference Finals. And all throughout it, Bismack had some huge games. He put up 10 and 16 off the bench in a win, 17 and 16 as a starter in one game, and even had a 26 rebound game in a win against the Cavs. Well, then the Cavs eliminated the Raptors and Biyombo became a free agent, and the Orlando Magic saw all they needed to see and gave him a monster 4-year $72 million contract at $18 million a season, after the man had only been a bench player his entire career. And the saddest part about all of this, the Orlando Magic kept him as a bench player even after giving him all that money. So I really have no more words anymore. Like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed. I'm out.